Today, I am excited to chat with Stephen Scott, who is in Glasgow, Scotland right now. He is the co-host and creator of the AMI podcast, Double Tap. Stephen, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Amber, great to be here.
Okay, so I have known a little bit about you and what you do for the past couple of years, but let's go back in time even further than that. How did you start creating content to shed light on what's happening in terms of accessible tech?
Well, I needed to make money, so I thought, let's do something. And I couldn't do anything else, so I thought I can talk for a living. How does that go? And that's kind of where it began. I started out in commercial radio. That was my beginnings in life. I started off doing talk radio. The funny thing was, it wasn't a talk show when I took it over, but by the end it was, because I just couldn't. I was talking more than playing the music, much to my boss's upset. But yeah, I started in that, and then later in my career, I joined a UK blindness charity that were starting up their own radio station, and then that got me into broadcast and charity, essentially. And then along the way, I just realized I was the tech guy at the radio station. Everyone was coming to me for the tech advice, and I was setting up the station technically and all that stuff. And I thought, it'd be really cool to do a show around tech. And no one wanted to do it. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea. Who is going to listen to a show about technology? And I just kept beating the drum saying, I think we can do this. And eventually I was told, okay, here's an hour on air. Don't break anything. Just go away and do it. Leave us alone. And that was how I did my original show. And then, what were we at? 7 or 8 years ago now, we started the Double Tap thing because the AMI guys, Accessible Media in Canada, they came over to the UK and spent some time with me. They were setting up their own live programming. And they heard about the tech show and said, hey, we want one of those. And I said, great. How much? And we went from there. But honestly, it's been great. It's been such an amazing ride. And Double Tap has gone from strength to strength, starting off as a weekly show and now a daily show, which is insane, quite frankly.
Absolutely. But it is 2025. And so we live in the year of insanity. And there is
Yes.
a lot happening in the tech world right now. I wanted to actually start with some of the reporting that you've done recently from CSUN Assistive Technology Conference. It was the 40th annual event. This conference is new to me. I had not heard of it previously. So let's start there. What is this conference all about?
So this is like the CES for assistive technology. And that's exactly what it is, frankly, because this is an amazing event that happens every single year. As you say, it's 40th year. And it brings together all the assistive tech companies from around the world to showcase and share new innovations. And there was a bit of a slow-growing space. I often felt that, if you could see a product 1 year, you'd see it in 5 years. It was the same product, very little development. The cost of assistive technology is really high, so it has a longer shelf life. But we're actually starting to see huge innovations because of the ability to build a piece of tech and then have it regularly updated, like we can with our iPhones and our iPads and everything else. So the same kind of thing applies now to assistive tech. So we're seeing more and more updates. AI is, of course, having a huge impact across the industry, but especially in the accessibility world. And that goes to mobility, with devices from companies like Glidance that are doing some amazing work, building essentially a robot that you can take for a walk. And you're pushing it, you're in control, but it can actually take you and navigate you around obstacles in the same way that a guide dog can. For many, many people out there who cannot get a guide dog, this is the kind of thing that we've been crying out for. Me, I work from home. I don't qualify for a guide dog, but I would definitely qualify for one of these. As I always say, I want a guide dog with a plug on it that I can take with me on an airport or to an airline, so I can sit on a plane for 11 hours and travel to Anaheim in California without having to worry about the dog. So there's that kind of technology. AI is kind of seeping into every area of accessibility, of course, for transcribing meetings, for coming up with suggestions for summaries of meetings, asking questions for people who are autistic. It's an amazing tool. People who are nervous to ask questions, you can use AI to help them in meetings, make them feel less embarrassed. This is the kind of stuff that was on show. And of course, tons more at CSUN.
Now, when you speak about AI, one of the areas I was fascinated to learn more about from watching your YouTube channel was just understanding AI within the phone, how it can help people who are blind or partially sighted. It's pretty amazing in terms of the camera in our phone as well as AI tech. So what's happening in that space?
So a couple of areas that are of key interest. So, of course, the camera is a big part of it. For blind people, we're often at the cutting edge of technology because we're always looking for that next big thing, that next piece of technology that can make our lives easier. We're all about trying to stay in the workplace, right? Or get into the workplace. And to do that, you have to be at the forefront of tech. Now, the camera on our smartphones for blind people was a way to extract information from letters, from post, from information. In the early days, you were OCR and you were using essentially scanning technology to scan a letter and read it. But of course, with AI, you can go much further than that. So if I get a letter from the doctor telling me I need to go in for an appointment, I can query the letter now using AI. I can scan the image or scan the document, and I can peek out particular information that I want. When is it happening? What's the phone number? How do I call the doctor to change the appointment? These are the kind of ways you can use the camera, which is really cool. But of course, on board an iPhone as well, or an Android phone now, you have your assistants. And for people like myself, talking to a device is much easier than trying to navigate through using a screen reader, which is essentially a way to navigate through a smartphone by audio only. And trust me, when you do it long enough, you get used to it, but you still hate every second of it because it's swipe, and you're hearing everything. I just want to do something. I want to buy that yellow kettle on Amazon, and I want it to be around $50. So instead of having to go through the whole process of a million search results, I can just say, find me a yellow kettle that costs around $50 on Amazon, and it just surfaces up a list. I can use that. And there was one company on display at CSUN that showcased this, a company called InnoSearch. That's INNO search. And what they do is they've essentially taken all the search results from Amazon and made it into a much more searchable, much more easy to navigate system for blind users. You can even invoke AI to query the images on the product. So for example, if I was buying, say, a Bluetooth speaker, and I wanted to know if it had a 3.5mm headphone jack on it, I can query the images and say, does this speaker have that? It can tell me if it does or doesn't. So cool and vital for a blind customer.
One of the things I've been curious about when you speak about new technology is so much of these enhancements and improvements are packed into the latest technology, which tends to be somewhat expensive at times for the average person. When we look at the digital divide that exists right now in terms of getting assistive technology out to people, do you see it getting any better?
It's definitely improving. There is still a huge digital divide that we need to discuss and talk about. I think at the base level, what is good is that assistive technology is inside every product we own. If you walk into a Best Buy today, almost everything in that store will be accessible to some degree or another. The only area which is lacking at the moment is appliances. So if you buy a dishwasher or you buy a washing machine or a dryer, you're not getting accessibility quite as good in there. But if you go to the computer section, every Mac, every Windows computer, every Chromebook has accessibility built into the core for low vision, for blind, and for multiple disabilities. And that's really, really important because that democratizes accessibility to some degree. We can choose what we want, and we know that we can have the same product as everyone else. When I got my iPhone, the very first iPhone came out, I'll be honest, I was terrified because this was essentially a sheet of glass with a button on it. And I'm thinking, how are we as blind people going to use this? And it wasn't until the fourth generation came along, they launched this thing called VoiceOver. And suddenly blind people were opened up to this world. And then from there on, Google launched TalkBack, and they have their own version of this. So I can buy any Android phone, I can buy any iPhone, and it's fully accessible. And of course, now with the ranges out there, you don't have to buy the latest and greatest. If you're struggling or you're on a budget, you can get access to maybe an earlier iPhone SE, or you could maybe buy a younger phone or an older phone, I should say, an iPhone 14 or 12. Essentially, you can get yourself on the ladder. You can go refurbished and you can get access to the same technology as everyone else. And that is what really is going to make the difference here.
When I think about what's happening today in 2025, and I look at some of the big tech companies and I see a bit of backlash against DEI, for example. I saw a really great interview that you did with someone who works in the US government where you were chatting about the fact that the A was missing in DEI and it's important to think about accessibility. Can you share a little bit more about that topic and how we can keep that front and center?
Yeah, I mean, I think that DEI is detached from the A being for accessibility, mainly because of the fact that some see accessibility as a tool, whereas DEI affects the people. But in fact, the tool is necessary because the people need it, right? So it's all combined. Essentially, what Brian DeConnick was talking about in his amazing piece that he wrote on his blog, The Politics of Accessibility, which is well worth reading. It was such an interesting article. And he was quite nervous to come on, I'll be honest, Amber. He wasn't overly keen on the idea because, it's a really delicate topic and no one really wants that spotlight on them in this space. But it was an important discussion to have, and he kind of kept away from the politics and talked more about how the politics of accessibility began, where it all began, how politics were involved, how governments were involved. and how moving away from that will have a detrimental impact on services. Because if companies aren't needing to impose or bring in accessibility requirements in the same way with DEI, then people will fall away. Now, I understand the arguments around DEI. I can see the arguments for and against. Some people feel it's gone too far. I understand all that. But look at it this way. If I'm, as I am, a blind guy, if I don't have an option to get into a workplace, if an employer just sees me as a blind guy and says, look, as a result of seeing you as a blind guy, that's it, I can't employ you. And trust me, in the UK alone, 92% of employers told a study in the UK alone, they would not employ a blind or disabled person. 92% of employers surveyed in this study, which was done 5 years ago, and according to recent stats, nothing much has changed. What chance have I got? We need DEI programs to help us get into employment so we can show what we can do. Once you're in the door, it's about showing your capability, and then you can succeed from there.
Does it make you nervous at all in terms of the narrative out there right now, especially on the political front, in terms of people just having much more narrow views of, who we should hire, what technology we should build? Are we at a tipping point?
I suppose I feel I've seen this movie before, and what I mean by that is that, over my career and certainly over my years, I've seen huge negative attitudes towards disability, especially. And, for me, what we're seeing is, and I suppose people would say this about race as well, you're essentially seeing other people being allowed to have these viewpoints in public, whereas before they were perhaps private. Now, it's very different between racism and ableism. They're very different things. I had a black friend of mine who said that, racism is born out of hate and ableism is born out of pity. And I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a good starting point from where things come from. It allows you to see where the opinions and the attitudes come from. Oh, there's that poor blind guy. He can't do very much for himself. I go to an airport, for example. I'm going to a huge conference. I'm going to be hosting this amazing podcast. I'm doing this great stuff. And yet I'm still yelled at by assistants. Are you okay there? Or alternatively, someone else talked to on my behalf. Is he okay? Can he walk? It's a classic. I didn't know that my eyes were connected to my legs, but apparently they are. So, you have these issues that you have to deal with all the time. And this is a daily occurrence. The problem is when people start to turn nasty about it, when the narrative becomes nasty. That's something that worries me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, both the words hate and pity, but I would add a third word in there, and I would say it's ignorance. Certainly, as someone like myself who's covered the tech industry for a couple of decades, I've always been acutely aware, as much as I possibly can be. I try to include technology that maybe is accessible, not to everybody, but a certain segment of the population. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten pushback where people say, like, how could you possibly be so lazy that you can't just get up and turn on your thermostat? And I have to remind people, like, not everybody can get up and turn on their thermostat and actually see their thermostat. But there is an ignorance there as well in terms of, people seeing technology through the lens of it allowing for accessibility to a wide swath of the population.
Yeah, and look, don't beat yourself up over it. I mean, I hate this narrative sometimes that comes out by disability advocates that suggests that everyone should know absolutely everything about everything all the time. That's not possible. You cannot know. I was low vision. I was blind. I had a girlfriend once who was in a wheelchair. I had no idea what that life was like. I couldn't tell you what her experience was like versus mine. It's a different thing. Now, should I learn? Should I educate myself? Yeah, sure. But you know what? I've got a lot of learning and education to do. I've got a life to lead. I've got things going on. We're all the same. We have to meet people where they are. I think good conversation and intrigue is a good way to start. I'm all for like this, having a conversation. We learn so much from each other. This is far more valuable than me sitting here saying, Amber, you need to do more on this or more on that. No, what you need to do is do exactly what you're doing, which is encourage conversation. And that's brilliant. We need to have more of that.
I think you're right. It's a great starting point. When we look ahead and you think of some of the big tech companies out there, I'm not asking you to pick favorites, but are there tech companies, generally speaking, that are doing a better job when it comes to accessibility and assistive tech?
Well, this is where CSUN's quite interesting because you get the chance to meet not just the assistive tech companies, but all the big mainstream players were there as well. So Amazon were there, LG were there, showcasing a number of products, which was quite interesting. Sony was the one that really stood out, actually, because they have an amazing new device out, which is a camera, which has been around for a long time, an A7C II. They've had the Sony DSLR range, which now has a screen reader built in. So that essentially means that someone who's low vision can actually use one of these cameras. I could never navigate the menu system on those. I love those cameras, but I can't use them. So, the idea that that now comes with a screen reader is incredible. And the guy running this, Dean, who's running this over at Sony, he is legally blind himself. And that is ultimately what we're looking for. We want the buy-in from the companies, but we kind of need people in there to do the bidding for us to some degree. And it's great when you can get people who are disabled into these companies. So I think Sony's doing a great job. I think Google, I think Amazon especially, of course, they've done a lot of work in this space. And I can't not say Apple because, if I was to pick a favorite, it would probably be Apple. And I'll tell you why. I know people think I'm a fanboy, and I am. But here's the thing. Every single product they bring out, I know will be accessible. Even the damn Vision Pro, which shouldn't even work for me, but it can. It's got a built-in screen reader. I can use it. I can navigate it entirely. Why I'd want to, I don't know. But the fact is the option is there. And that's what it's all about. Anyone at any time can join the disability club, whether they like it or not. We need to make sure the world is accessible for everybody, including those who are not disabled.
It was hard for me to really pick just one video on your YouTube channel because there are so many, but one that kind of made me chuckle a little bit was talking about accessible TVs, because I have to say, as someone who's been in the tech industry for 2 decades, navigating any type of TV is still difficult. So I have to ask the question, is there any one TV out there that's better than any other in terms of being accessible for a wider range of people?
It's a difficult one because there's a lot of options out there and some are better than others. I wouldn't say there's one that pips the post at all. I'd say that Fire TVs maybe are the closest from Amazon. But, Sony and Samsung have done great work in this space. I'm watching Samsung eagerly. The problem isn't really the television itself. I mean, I just think that the layout of these things, and you'll know this yourself, I don't think the layout's very good at all. I often say, I don't know how anyone can enjoy using these things. They're slow, they're laggy.
Sure.
And when you add a screen reader into that, you can see really how laggy it is. Because, when you press that button to arrow down, I'm guessing something visually is happening on screen. Maybe the whole thing's moving up a bit or whatever. And it's taken time for the screen reader to respond because it has to wait for everything to get into position so it can focus on it. And that's a real problem. So there's that. But then also there's the third-party application. So you go off and download Netflix or Disney or Paramount Plus or whatever it is. You go off and get these apps and you download them onto your TV. There's no guarantee that they will be accessible with the screen reader built into the television. So you end up in this situation where you don't get access to the things on the TV you want to access. And then, of course, there's a whole discussion around described video and whether that's available in the platform. And it does turn a lot of blind people off television because they say, oh, look, this is just it's a fight I just cannot be bothered having.
When we look into the future, and I don't want to ask you to predict 5 or 10 years out, but is there something that you're especially excited about?
I think the rise in AI is good. I think we see a lot of bad and a lot of negative in AI. I think for the blind community, for the disability community more widely, I think in terms of automation, in terms of being able to, and assistants in particular on our smartphones getting smarter, I think these are the things we need to watch because these are where essentially the accessibility becomes easier. Now, it will get to a point, I believe, where we will no longer have traditional operating systems like we've had before with apps and all the rest. It'll probably be agentic, right? So we'll be using AIs to perform tasks. I want an Uber, it knows where I am, it asks me where I'm going, and it just works, and that's it. And I think what will happen is, again, like the technology, the hardware has been democratized to some degree, the software will follow with AI. So that's the bit I'm looking forward to. Cannot wait for driverless cars. I keep thinking I want my driverless car to take me to KFC. But then I think to myself, well, can't I just get the car to go to KFC itself and bring me back the chicken food? That would be nice. But no, I'm intrigued in that and how AI can influence mobility through Glidance, through WeWalk, and those kind of smart devices that are helping us get around more easily. It's a really exciting time with AI.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So for people who want to watch some of your content, some of the TV content, where is the best place for them to go?
So the website's doubletaponair.com. Yeah, we still say on air. It's a bit old-fashioned these days, but yeah, we're doing that. And also you can get us Double Tap Video is what to search for. We have to say that because otherwise we end up in amongst some really interesting categories because of the name Double Tap. So yeah, but Double Tap Video is where you'll find us on YouTube, and we're across social media. Mastodon's where I tend to live, but also on X as well.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me. I could talk to you forever. I love all of your content, especially the daily shows that you're putting out there, the coverage from CSUN as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, Amber. Really appreciate it.